Well, I want to welcome you to this podcast entitled Funding Your Future Now. My name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and I've been a fundraising executive for 25 years with two nonprofits. And the purpose of this podcast is just to add value. Whether you're in a leadership role in the nonprofit world as a president, maybe a fundraising executive, I bring people on the podcast who speak into that world from practical life experiences that they have. And so today, our guest is Mandy Pearce, and Mandy started an organization that is called Funding for Good. And what that does, it helps organizations and consultants, so people that work in a consulting role, grow for good. So, Mandy, so glad to have you here. Welcome. And why don't you just give us a little bit of an intro to who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I am the owner of Funding for Good, and my entire career as an employee was with nonprofits in a development role. So I was always the development director. And about 17 years ago, I decided that I was getting a lot of requests for support. So we started a consulting business, and that consulting business has grown. National organization. We work with US-based nonprofits and consultants, and we help nonprofits with things like strategic planning, leadership development, board development, and fundraising coaching. And then we work with consultants in the nonprofit sector to help them start and grow their businesses.
You know, quite a unique blend, isn't it? Working with the nonprofit itself, because you have that experience, you know that world, and then working with the consultants that work with nonprofits. So it's a fascinating position you're in, training consultants who train the nonprofit. So here's a question for you to think about. What patterns do you see in what consultants to nonprofits struggle with that actually mirror what the nonprofit leaders also struggle with? So looking at what's happening between the two of them that's similar.
I find that a lot of nonprofit consultants come from the nonprofit sector. Not all of them. Sometimes we have people from the for-profit sector that want to get into the nonprofit sector, and that's not the majority, but it happens. I find very often that one of the most common similarities between the two are mindset issues around money. So, you come from the nonprofit sector and it's been drilled in your head, shoestring budget. What can we get for free? We can't afford this. We can't afford that. We can't afford to increase pay. We can't afford to whatever the thing is. And then when those folks get into their consulting business, it's like, oh, I could never charge that. They couldn't pay for it. And they don't understand the value of the service that they're providing because of their experience in the nonprofit sector mindset. And so that is a huge similarity that I see across the board. So I work with consultants a lot on mindset around money.
So what do you say to them?
And there's three big questions that everybody in any business has to ask. Doesn't matter if you're a consultant or anything else. What do I have to make? What do you have to make to keep the lights on, to keep the car from getting repoed, to make sure there's food on the table? Not what do I have to make to take a vacation or put money in my retirement account or any of the extras, just basics. What do you have to bring in? You have to know that number. Then you have to know, what do I want to bring in? And not the want like, oh, I'd love to make $1 million this year, but the want like, I'd like to be able to put this back in my retirement. I'd like to be able to retire by this age. I'd like to be able to go out to eat with my girlfriend once a week or, whatever the things are. That life-work balance, not work-life balance. Like, what is the life you want? What does that cost? You got to know those two numbers. Then you have to ask yourself, how many hours a week am I willing to work, billable hours, in my business, right? You have to work on your business, but you're not getting paid for that. How much are you working in your business? And how many weeks a year do you want to work as a consultant? Like, how many weeks? I'm hoping you're not working 52 weeks a year, unless it's by choice, because why would you have your own business, right? Hopefully you're scheduling in some time off. Once you know those things, then you can determine what do you have to charge in order to make the minimum? What can you charge to make this is what I'd like to make? Are those reasonable numbers? You can play with that formula for the rest of your consulting career, but that's where we start the conversation. If you don't know those very basic numbers, it's really hard to say, what should you charge? Sometimes people come at it and say, but I want to know what other people are charging. Other people are not you. And it's not comparing apples to apples. You could have two grant writers with wildly different experiences, wildly different skill sets, wildly different success rates. And so going to someone else and saying, well, they live in my town and this is what they charge, that's what I want to charge, that's not apples to apples. So you have to evaluate from the inside, What is your value and what do you need? And then we can look at, is it reasonable? I was talking to a consultant the other day that charges $35 an hour. And I'm like, you just need to go back and work for somebody. Like,
Right.
by the time you take your taxes out and your overhead, you're not making enough to justify having your own business. And then other people that come into the sector that have never consulted that are like, I want to charge $350 an hour. And I'm like, I mean, honestly, if you can, more power to you. But I don't know that that's a realistic expectation day one, never having consulted in the sector at all. So, you gotta have somebody's got to be able to bring you back to reality with what's realistic. And so that's kind of where we start that conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's exceptionally practical insight, those three categories. So thank you for that. Question number 2, you work with organizations and nonprofits. You help them think about what are some bold goals, bold revenue goals that could be achieved. But sometimes there's a tension in the nonprofit world between ambitious targets that stretch us and unrealistic projections that could actually demoralize a team where they say, wow, how are we going to ever possibly do that? So how do you help leaders distinguish between a goal that stretches capacity and one that just sets them up for failure?
We do a lot of strategic planning with clients. We use an evidence-based model called the technology of participation, and it's a consensus-based process. So when we do planning, we want to make sure the appropriate voices are in the room and that every voice is heard. And in strategic planning for a nonprofit, you need to hear from the board, you need to hear from the staff, and any other stakeholders that influence the decisions and the outcomes of the process. And so if a leader is making a decision by themselves and they haven't received the input from the staff, that wasn't a good decision in the first place.
For sure.
If a staff person is just randomly making up goals and presenting us like, we're going to do this, but they haven't had input from the leadership to say, is it feasible? Do we have the resources to make that happen and thought through it? Again, not really a good place to start. And the other thing is, you can create really awesome goals, but part of the strategic planning process is saying, now, how are we going to implement that? When you start having that conversation, then you realize this might not be 100% possible this year.
For sure.
Maybe we make it this, and this is why, right? And so when you have the appropriate voices in the room, you get those perspectives. The staff are off by themselves making up goals, and the leadership knows there's restrictions, or we have these obligations coming up, or this or that, or whatever. The staff may not be informed on that. And vice versa. If the leaders are making the decisions and the staff are like, yeah, it's not possible to do that, and here's why, that's why both of those voices need to be in the room. And there needs to be a facilitation process so everybody's voice can be heard and you can move through the process. Like, it doesn't need to take a year to put a plan together. And then fleshing out the steps to make sure it's realistic. Sometimes we get in that implementation process, that conversation around how are we going to do it? What's the strategy behind it? And we're like, oh, this really might not be possible until the next quarter, the next year, whatever. So again, I feel like having all those voices in the room and really having a facilitated conversation that builds consensus helps with realistic goal setting for any company.
Yeah, I love that. I often think that it's not always the case, but some nonprofit presidents are very ambitious in their revenue goals. Let's reach the sky. And so the fact that you talk about implementation, so bringing it down to earth, okay, Mr. President, you say we want to raise X. What specifically do you see as the plan, the tactics, the measurables, the metrics? What are you going to do? What's the team going to do? So that starts getting into a lot of the nitty gritty of taking that lofty goal, which still may be achievable, but it has to be operational. So great insights on that. Well, you work in a cross section of areas. You bring, the nonprofit, the corporate, consulting. So you see a lot of vectors and factors that come together. So when you're working with a nonprofit executive director who's maybe never worked outside that sector, so that's sort of all they know, what's the most valuable mindset or practice you've imported from the business world that could completely reframe how they think about fundraising or organizational growth?
Nonprofit is your tax status, not your business model.
Okay. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Depending on, I've worked with folks in the sector who understand the concept that their nonprofit is a business, right? It's not the majority. A lot of people come into the sector and start nonprofits, founders, people that take in those roles. They have a really, really big heart for the mission, but the heart doesn't pay the bills. And they don't always have that business mindset. And very many times those founders will surround themselves with friends in the community who just want to support them because they're amazing people, but they're
For
also
sure.
not necessarily the business people that you need to run an organization. And, a lot of people don't grasp the concept that your board of directors are fiduciaries. They are financially and legally responsible for what happens with the organization. And so I think that just a lot of education around these are the roles, right? So we teach a training called the 4 cornerstones of board governance. Like, this is what you really need to know before you decide to do that thing. The founder's role in the nonprofit they create, right? Like, what is your role? And you cannot be a board member and the founder, but that's a conflict of interest. And at
Oh,
some point, you either have to decide, I'm going to be the executive director and I'm going to run this organization, but I'm not going to be on the board, or I'm going to be on the board, but I'm not going to run the organization.
okay.
And that's a real hard conversation to have with people that are founders. When you create a nonprofit, it is not a for-profit business. It is not your baby forever. You've created something for the community and you're giving the community your baby. And that is a very difficult concept for some people to grasp. And a lot of times people ask me, I think I want to start a nonprofit. And I'm like, do you really? And so we have the conversation of why. And a lot of people realize, oh, it's not really mine. I'm not to do it because they don't have control over it forever. So there's just a lot of basic principles that go into creating sustainability for a nonprofit that we talk about that are direct carryovers from the for-profit world. Like, your sustainability can't be dependent upon taking out a business loan every year, right? That's not sustainability. Therefore, your sustainability in the nonprofit shouldn't be dependent on writing grants every year. Now, this is coming from I started my business as a grant writer,
Okay.
but you shouldn't be dependent on it to function from day to day. More than 30% dependency on that is a crutch. And so it's a lot of those basic concepts that you and I are super familiar with because we're fundraisers. But a lot of people just, you don't know what you don't know till someone tells you. And a lot of it is just best practices. And that's the most interesting things that people don't know is the things you think they would, right? Just the basic stuff that you and I take for granted that we know, they don't know.
Yeah. You made that comment, and I'm going to share a practical example of a person starts a nonprofit and invites his or her friends to be on the board, sort of a typical kind of a thing. So I'm working right now with an individual that did that a few years ago. And these are good people, wonderful, but they do not have the sense. And unfortunately, the founder of the organization did not have the sense either of how are these people going to help me operate this business from a business model as a nonprofit. And so these individuals aren't even giving to the nonprofit. And I said, wow, that's not a good way to get things going. And they don't really have, while they're good people, they don't really have some acumen, some skills to say, how do we make this operational from a very wise perspective so it can function revenue-wise successfully in the future? And so
Right.
great advice as you look at establishing a nonprofit board. Who are the people and what different expertise do they bring to the board? That really will be helpful. Well, here's the last question. You've made a strategic choice to strengthen the consultants. I know you do some fundraising consultants, but you're working with people that are actually the consultants. Walk us through the theory of change. When you improve a consultant's business model or coaching skills, what specific impact does that have down the line at the individual nonprofit? So what's the multiplier effect as you help consultants? What do you see the impact that has?
A lot of folks, I think in any business, go in and they want to give you everything they can. They want to deliver as much as possible. They want you to have a lot of resources at your fingertips because partially it shows that they have the knowledge to share all that with you, right?
For sure.
The thing that most people don't understand until they have the conversation or until it's happened to them is just because I give you, we'll use a fundraising example here, just because I give you 50 foundation prospects and say, oh, these are all great prospects for you, doesn't mean you have the capacity to go through 50 prospects in a year and write 50 grants, right?
Sure.
You have to build relationships with those folks. You have to see if you qualify. You have to fill out LOIs or whatever their process is. You have to write the grant. Then you have to wait, right? Very few organizations are doing that. So when you're doing grant research as a service, as a consultant, if you overwhelm a client, one, they will either just not do it. They'll just be like, oh my God, that's overwhelming. And they'll put it to the side. They'll do some of it and the rest will be a complete waste of everybody's time. Or B, if they are that really rare unicorn that can process 50 grants in a year, they won't need to come back to you for anything because you gave them everything you knew the first time,
Sure.
right? So you lose the opportunity to continue supporting them in a way that is sustainable for your business and theirs.
For sure.
It's partially like just trying to make sure that what they deliver is quality, that they understand how to establish processes for working with clients, like onboarding, intake forms, how do you offboard, how do you deliver, how do you set parameters, right? Scopes of work and contracts, like what goes into all of those and why, how are you protecting yourself? How are you talking about what you're going to deliver? How are you creating the documents that you're going to use for your company without going out and being like, hey, AI, create it for me? Because when you do that, you're not thinking through your process, your personality, your communication styles. What are you
Mhm.
hoping to get as a result of it, right? You're just saying, hey, create this thing for me. And then you take that document and you use it. Or you go to somebody else's content and you're like, oh, they have this free thing. I'm going to download it, make it my own.
Sure.
You're not taking the time to create those things. And in that case, when you work with a client, you make the rest of us look bad, right?
Okay.
Oh, consultants are such a waste of money. Oh, consultants are such a waste of time. I paid a consultant and I got this horrible blah, 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 or they didn't even deliver what they said they were, right? So that's happening all the time. I hear that conversation so much. I don't want to hire a consultant because.
Sure.
And so being able to really work with people to create amazing consulting companies, to create amazing products for their clients, to help them understand their capacity. And if they want to grow their business, help them understand how to grow a team or how to do those things is important. I'm not going to be here forever and I don't want to be. I want to retire at 55. And I would love to know that there are lots and lots and lots of amazing consultants in the world, which there are, who will just step in and keep doing all the work, right? There's so much work out there, and not any of us can do it all. There's more work than any of us can do. So having really great networks and knowing and trusting that the consultants that you're networking with are quality and people that you want to partner with, that's kind of what I'm trying to set up, a community of consultants that can continue to grow.
Yeah. I just love the idea of a legacy that you're wanting to set up. That's excellent. We've got I call them the fast five. There, we'll wrap up our conversation. They're more personal kind of related questions. So here's the first one. What would you say is the best professional advice you have ever received?
When I was little, my mom told me everybody's replaceable. And I have remembered that my whole career because it's true. I've seen people that I didn't think, oh my gosh, what would they do if this person leave in whatever way that happened. And things kept on trucking along. You know, you might have had a day or two where something didn't happen, but people get replaced. And if you take on everything that they ask you to do that's not part of your job description, they'll expect you to do it and they'll still replace you when you're gone. So that stuck with me my whole career.
Yeah. Great piece of advice. Yay, mom. Second question is, what's a daily habit you cannot live without?
Black tea.
Okay, there you go. There she goes for the black tea, probably. Okay, that sort of just gives you that lift. I take it.
It is. I even carry my own tea bags with me just in case somebody doesn't have black tea.
Yeah, really. You're caring for yourself that way. Okay, question number three. If you could go back to your 20-year-old self and give yourself one piece of advice, what would that be?
Put everything you can into your retirement account now so you can retire earlier than you even want to.
I love that. That's great. Great advice. Working with the end in mind. Okay, question number four. What's a failure? I'm not talking about something dramatic, but it was in your past, obviously, but you learned from it, so it actually set you up for success.
Yeah. So when we had the business, I think maybe after 5 years, we had a lot of people asking us for an in-person conference type event. Marie, my lead consultant, and I put together this conference for board development. And we had everything set up. We marketed it. We advertised it. I probably spent like $20,000, space, marketing, all the things. And we got like 6 people to register. So we had to cancel the event. I ended up
Well,
getting maybe like half of that investment back. It was a great learning experience. So the next time I decided to put a conference on, I knew so much more and had so many more fail safes in place. And it was a success. So we actually have the nonprofit consulting conference every year. For the first 3 years, it was virtual, and now it's been in person 2 years. This year will be our third. And so, yeah, it was a really great learning experience.
yeah. Well, I think that's the perspective we need to have, that when we're feeling the negativity of the the dark moment, just to say, okay, how can I flip this? What can I learn from it? So I'm glad you're on the other side. Last
Yes.
question. Where's your favorite place? I know you live in North Carolina. Sort of disconnect and recharge.
Up my garden.
Okay, yeah. Tell us about your garden. What do you like to grow?
We grow everything. So if it's a southern crop, we grow it. And we have a very, very nice garden area. My husband helps me with the raised beds and cattle panels and all the things. And this year, we're going to be planting pomegranate trees and
Mhm.
kiwi vines, and something called a jelly melon. So, like, those are the new things I get to start with this year. And I've got some new flowers
Okay.
I'm planting, but we plant tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini and squash and potatoes and tomatoes and garlic and okra and cauliflower and broccoli and cabbage and onions and beets and just pretty much everything. Loofahs, gourds. Yeah, we plant it all. Beans.
Love it. You have a green thumb, that's for sure. That's
Yes,
great.
we love it.
Well, Mandy, what a delight to connect with you. You've given us so many practical tips for rather either the fundraiser or the consultant, how to think very practically on those kind of issues. So appreciate it. I'd love for you to share a little bit about how people can connect with you, maybe a website or something else that they could go to just to learn more about what you do and the value you add.
Sure. And if you put it in the show notes, that'd be helpful as well. But the website is fundingforgood.org. And my email is mandy@fundingforgood.org, MANDY. And you can connect with me directly in either of those places. If you're a consultant, there's a consulting tab on our website. You can learn about all the things we do, from boot camp to the conference to our upcoming Nonprofit Consulting Summit 101 happening next month. And then everything else on the websites for nonprofits. So you can learn about strategic planning or coaching or one-on-one
Yes.
support there as well. And we also have a fundraising conference coming up for nonprofits February 18th, which this might not be ready before then. But so lots of ways to connect with us there. We're always online.
I just love how you're giving value back to the nonprofit world, whether they be executives or consultants. So hey, appreciate the time so much. My name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding the Future Now podcast. And you can reach me at randydirks.com. So for now, till the next one, thanks everybody. Okay, so I've stopped it.
There you go.
Yeah, well, I love the fact that you're in these two worlds, and obviously you do that extremely well. So any reaction or comment on the podcast itself?
No, it went well. You were well prepared, and